listeners. This is Kev Duffy, and this is my 5th episode of What's Your Random podcast, where I discover and celebrate independent creativity. From the mysteries of inception to the practicalities of process. And before I introduce my guest today, I want to thank those who make this show possible. That's you, listeners. This is our pilot season, shooting for 20 episodes within 2020. And along the way, we want to hopefully pick up some steam with new listeners. So be sure to share and subscribe and give us a rating on iTunes, because that does go a very, very long way in helping us spread the word. And we're also looking for feedback on how we could improve the show moving forward into our what I guess would be our first season in 2021. Oh, and hang around at the end of the podcast, because I'm going to start from this episode on providing some short notes for myself and for listeners who are interested in the creative process of making What's Your Random. So at the end of this episode, for the first time, I hang around for a couple of seconds and just talk about improvements I've made in my own creative process in making What's Your Random, and some general feedback on that. So hang around after the show for that. So without further ado, my guest today is Henry Scriven. He has a project on Kickstarter right now for To A Cinder, a neo-noir thriller based on the graphic novel A Stakeout Leads to Obsession, a feature-length crime thriller, feminist noir movie by an award-winning creative team. So that's his project, and it has 3 days to go, and they are very close to their goal. So pause the podcast. Make sure you come back to the podcast, but pause the podcast. Go check out To A Cinder on Kickstarter, and then come back here and join Henry and I for a really fun discussion about filmmaking, indie filmmaking, and just general creativity. So without further ado, Henry Scriven. Enjoy the rant. And I like the beard. It's a different look than the picture you sent me.
This is a lockdown beard. This is this is months of I'm not seeing anyone, so why should I bother?
Yeah. Well, before we get into further facial hair conversations, welcome to What's Your Random? I'm still trying to figure out a good tagline to hone in on what it is I'm trying to achieve here, but basically, narrowing in on a person, their creative project, and their process, where the project originated, the process that they're using to bring it to fruition to share with the world, and every hop and skip along the way. So my guest today is Henry Scriven. Is the last name pronounced correctly? Yeah, okay. Henry Scriven, and he has a Kickstarter going on right now for To A Cinder, which is a feature-length narrative film, and I'm sure he will tell us more about that. So welcome to What's Your Random, Henry.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me on, and pleased to be here.
Very good. Okay, so back to the facial hair. Growing it. So I wouldn't guess that is all of your gains since March.
No, I have hit it with some scissors every now and again, because otherwise it would be a sort of full kind of lumberjacky type beard, I guess.
Right. Oh, you know what? I realized I didn't start my video. I'm sorry about that. There we go. Here I am.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Oh, you got like
so I'm freshly shaved. I had like a 5 o'clock shadow, and I thought better of.
Did you shave for the podcast? You shaved for the podcast?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I didn't shave for my regular day job this morning, but I shaved for the podcast, so you get the special treatment.
What's your regular day job?
I do sales for ingredient company. I work for a Japanese company.
Okay, cool. And where are you?
And I am located in the beautiful state of North Carolina in the
Nice.
US on the East Coast via New York. So,
I learned where North Carolina is this morning because of well, you know where that is. Um,
yeah.
because I was up till about sort of 4 a.m. last night looking at all the different states and what's going on here and what's going on there.
You and
Um,
me both, and a good portion of the American populace, I think,
yeah.
regardless of your politics in this country. I think
Mm.
everybody's on edge and just anxious. So we finally found something that we could share, some commonality, that we don't
I
like
think,
sitting on, you know, waiting for results
yeah, I think the
collectively.
world is watching at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I don't think many people were able to focus on work very well today. I was definitely tired. I couldn't fall asleep even after I tried to hit the hay.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I know you're supposed to be talking to me, but I just, it'd be nice to know, why did you decide to start up a podcast?
Yeah, no, this is a long form conversational podcast. I'm
Right.
happy to answer questions as I ask them. Um, especially I kind of had a general idea about wanting to just talk to more creative folks spanning all mediums and medias. And during the lockdown, I just cannot participate in short form social media dialogue. And because of that, I found my avenues for communication very limited. And I was like, how can I create a new avenue? And my friend simultaneously was talking about doing his own podcast. And he did one episode with me, and we just kind of were shooting the shit. And I had a good time, and I felt really refreshed after having a long form conversation with an old friend of mine from college. And I kept kind of weeks after that. I was like, hey, when are you starting the podcast? When are you getting guests? When can I be on again? When can we, just talk about a random topic? And he was dragging his feet. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. So he was actually my first guest. His name's David Schulwitz. And, he just does business. He does real estate. And we talked about that on the first episode of this podcast. And his lack of motivation to continue on with his project kind of motivated me to start my own. And then I started reaching out to people and finding random projects on Kickstarter and on random illustrators on Instagram. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people who I would love to talk to if they're willing to speak with me. And here we are.
Here we are. Here we are. Am I your first non-US chat?
You are indeed. Yeah. So last night I've had one illustrator guest who does, and his episode should be released hopefully by the weekend, Peter Rick,
Cool.
who has a Kickstarter that's ongoing called Ghosts Are People Too. It's an illustrated book for children, and it's really well done and beautiful. And he's also a musician. He's involved in film. He's a multimedia kind of guy, but with a particular interest in directing, like yourself. And then I've spoken with two comic book people. One is the second guest on the podcast was a writer for comic books. And I spoke with Don Wynn last night, who is an illustrator for comics. Yeah, so it's, I don't have expertise in comics. I don't have expertise in illustration. I have a little bit experience in film from a more indie guerrilla background.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to try to, with a limited knowledge and some past history, for example, collecting comic books, trying to jump back into the conversation and relearn and have a intelligent conversation with creators in that space.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Wow. I'm glad to be part of it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. So to start out, you could maybe just set the stage by introducing your current project, To A Cinder, and then we could definitely jump into The Fox, was it? The short, which I just watched before we jump on the call, and I was really into it, and actually, um, you know, said things out loud as I watched by myself with my headphones on. I reacted as you would probably hope people would react. So yeah, please
Cool.
introduce.
Yeah. So I mean, as you sort of set up, we've got a Kickstarter running at the moment for a feature film, To A Cinder, which I'm shooting with my team at the beginning of next year, probably February 2021. So yeah, the journey to here started maybe 18 months ago. I found I'd done a series of short films like the one you mentioned, The Fox, and I was on the lookout for some interesting material, something to adapt. I wanted to make a feature film, but wasn't quite, and I knew sort of the genre and the tone that I wanted to make sure that I want to make one in, but I didn't quite have the material, the script, and I came across this comic online called Her exclamation mark by David Taylor, who's a Scottish comic book artist. And the comic itself was really short. It's like a sort of short story, only a few pages. But I just thought it was cool. It was great. It was just like it encapsulated the sort of old school essence of noir, but with a kind of like really interesting contemporary twist. It felt very current. It had this kind of like feminist idealism behind it. It was really interesting to me, and I just thought it was very different. So that was about 18 months ago. And then from then I started on my journey, which was first to contact the comic book artist, start a conversation going with him, eventually getting the rights to make the film, putting a team together, producers and cinematographers and all these types of people, getting some investment for the film. And it's culminated now in this Kickstarter, which once it finishes, will be fully financed and will be ready to go. So yeah, it's a really exciting journey that's been sort of, over the last year and a half. And it's taking me to where we are now, almost ready to shoot, which is very exciting.
Yeah. And so you are writer and director?
Yeah, that's right. I've been sort of working as a director in the UK, mainly in London, for like about 10, 15 years or so, mostly commercials, branded content, but like I said, like making lots of short films, drama, stuff like that. Yeah, I love writing scripts. I love making films. I love telling stories. I love filmmaking as an art. It's such a sort of collaborative process that you get, lots of sort of artists and filmmakers together to make something. Something that really excites me.
Yeah, for sure. So is this your first feature then?
Yeah, well, technically my second. I did make one when I was studying a sort of a no budget type student film. So technically it's my second one, but I think it's the first one that's had some proper funding behind it, professional actors, all this type of stuff. So yeah.
And are you wearing any other hats besides the director and writer hats?
I think when you sort of kind of semi-lead a project, you do end up wearing a bunch of hats. I've got a producer and an associate producer, but I'm also doing some of the producing work, I'd say. But to be fair, I'd say the producers are also helping me with the creative work as well. So, we're kind of taking some of the burden off each other. I think the most important thing as a director is to get a really talented team around you. Surround yourself with talented people and people who are much more intelligent than you are. And then when it turns out well, you can take all the credit. I think that's the main job of a director. Great actors, great crew, great producers, and you're in the clear. You're good.
Yeah, that's like director hacking 101.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Get good people, then take the
Yeah.
credit.
But yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you made some what kind of guerrilla films. Is this something that you still do? Do you make films as well?
I'm working on a project right now, and costuming and script writing and character development and writing and stuff, more in the superhero kind of
Wow.
realm.
Yeah.
The film that I produced, wrote, produced, edited, directed, acted in, wore all of the hats possible, and then also collaborated with great creatives and actors. It was called Rider Reel, and put it in a couple of film festivals. Didn't get into too many. The audio was my biggest challenge, I think, to give it a real um, sense of quality. And now I have like one little thing I want to do to it to before I just put it on YouTube for casual viewing. But I was speaking with Don Wynn yesterday, who is the comic book artist I was mentioning, and he gave me advice that I should try to bring it to some Comic Cons, because they do some film screenings there for indie producers and directors. So yeah, something to consider, to kind of revisit that project as I try to spin it into
Mm.
future.
Yeah. That's good advice. That's really good. So it's a superhero movie, but I'm assuming on a sort of indie type budget.
Yeah, so Rider Reel was about it foundationally was a homage to the Japanese tokusatsu hero Kamen Rider, who was like a grasshopper motif riding a motorcycle, in the Power Rangers live action kind of genre. And I wanted to take elements from that, but then run it through the narrative of a drama. Um, so yeah, it was an interesting creative process. I was really happy with the script and how the pacing came out on screen. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I definitely learned a lot through that process. But for me, my biggest challenge was the audio. We recorded on an H4n device, which in many ways saved the day, but uh, because the onboard audio is such crap. Uh, but still, in some areas, it just wasn't placed right, or there was other background interference that was tough to get rid of. Did some
It's hard.
ADR and stuff like that too, but it was hard to totally revamp the project from an audio standpoint.
It's hard with audio. Like I think audiences will forgive poor quality video or shots that they don't like, or low resolution. But if you can't hear what's going on, if you can't hear the sound, it's quite hard to move past it. Um,
Yeah, especially when you're sitting editing yourself and you have decent quality headphones on, you're listening to it in stereo, and you could hear every transition you try to make between cuts. What, in your experience, has been the most difficult aspect of the projects you've worked on?
I guess, yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, I
And
think,
obviously, I guess before I ask that question, are you formally trained, and did you study film in uni?
yeah, not originally. I originally studied economics, and I went back 2, 3 years later to do a master's in film directing, because by the from being at uni, making short films after uni. I even did a 4 week course at a film school in Maine, um, in the States as well. But like I did a bunch of like these short film courses and did a master's and kind of got into films like that way. Um, so yeah, I did do formal training. Um, the courses I did, I felt the best thing I gained from them was always the meeting fellow filmmakers, and the camaraderie and the passion and the ability, or to be in a space where you can learn off each other. a lot more than the actual learning of the technical craft, which I think you just kind of pick up more from, researching and watching stuff and practicing and making, 10, 20 short films when you start, which are just not very good at all. And then understanding why they're not good and then making another one and it's worse. And you're saying, well, you think you're going backwards and then you make another one and it's it's a kind of a bit of a snakes and ladder type thing. So I guess some formal training, but I think the most important thing about that is just putting yourself in a place to meet other filmmakers, which is really great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And relating this back to my conversation I had yesterday, top of my mind, the comic book artist was part of a collective that's meeting at a comic book store and putting these comics and anthologies together. And I was really struck about the brick and mortar, real world people meeting people, before COVID, being able to shake hands and exchange hugs and pleasantries in person. And that is kind of alive and well and really important part of creative collaboration. And to hear it again here just kind of proves the point.
Yeah, definitely. I think, we create art and we get inspired by other people's art and other people's films and other people's comics and drawings and illustrations. And it's always the best way to learn and get tips and advice and just enjoy yourself. You're supposed to be doing all these things because you enjoy making it. They're supposed to make you happy. So why not share that love around a bit,
Yeah, for sure. So going back to the previous question, after I kind of jumped in and steered us in a different direction, in terms of filmmaking, full process from finding a reference material, script writing, all the way through to releasing it, what part of that process is most difficult for you? With the example of mine being the sound was a difficult.
Yeah. Okay. What's the most difficult bit? I don't know. I quite enjoy it. I mean, raising finances is hard, especially as a sort of an indie filmmaker. Getting people to believe, or even taking the time to sit down and read your scripts. One of the reasons I decided to pursue a comic book adaptation rather than trying to pitch original scripts that I'd written was that I knew, whereas, to get an investor to sit down and read a script is quite a difficult process, and they might not even understand scripts and how they're written, and they might get bored. But put a comic book on a table that's quite short and put that on, underneath their nose, something that they can just read in a few minutes, understand the visual language of the story itself, and the tone and the setting that you're going to go for. It just worked as a much better way to hook people in, to get people excited about the story that I was making. So, which is one of the reasons that we went down this kind of like adaptation route to start with. But it's definitely a hard process, raising the money. The fun bit's writing it, the fun bit's shooting it, the fun bit is editing it. And I think the hard bit is probably all the financial stuff. So at the beginning, raising the money, and then afterwards trying to sell the film, trying to get distribution, trying to get sales agents, trying to put it in cinemas or get it online. All those things that they don't really teach you at film school.
Right. I mean, it boils down to kind of self-promotion to some degree, or, self-promotion and promoting your own project when you're an indie producer, right? And hopefully you have partners and people attached to the project who can bring some interest into the project with them just because of their reputation, or maybe they have a small fan base or a large fan base themselves.
Yeah.
And with taking the comic book, you are hopefully bringing in people who had interest in that book and that author and creator.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a sort of a niche audience there. There's people who love David's comics. You know, he's made a series of comics which are all really great. But I think you know when a distributor is looking at a film, they will look at it as a standalone piece. They will just think to themselves, how can I market this? How can I sell this? What is the audience? Do the audience care? Is it worth us taking a risk on that? So what you've got to have, I think, is a bit of hustle, you know, some dedication, some work, and yeah, just that extra kind of roll up your sleeves and get on with it and just pitch it and tell people why it's great and, you know, try and get it out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it seems like you've done that. You've raised some finances outside of Kickstarter, and Kickstarter is kind of the final push to really put you guys where you need to be to create what your vision is, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, we've managed to, yeah, we've been lucky to be able to raise enough money to make it, and yeah, it was a bit of sweat, and it was quite obviously quite difficult doing a lot of that during lockdown and COVID, and not quite being sure when we are going to be allowed to shoot things. I don't know how it is in the States, but we had a first lockdown here, you know, kind of March to July, and we weren't allowed to go out and work. We weren't allowed to film anything at that moment. We're about to, tomorrow actually, we're about to enter a second lockdown. We were free for a few months, and now we're being locked up again. But this lockdown, the rules are slightly different. We're allowed to go in, as long as we have a COVID safe shoot, then we're allowed to go out and film for our work. So we'll see what the situation is when we come to shoot in February, but hopefully it'll be okay.
And yeah, I mean, as for the situation in the United States, your guess is kind of as good as mine. It's state by state, and it's all over the place. Some states seem to be locked down much more than others. Yeah, like New York and California obviously are much more cautious because of the density of population there.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate, if you've looked into the rules for the next lockdown and or opening, are there any limitations on filming with the pandemic that would like affect your ability to do what you want to do and achieve what you want to achieve?
I don't think so. I think there are certain rules about having a COVID monitor on set. Obviously, rules, the standard rules about masks and washing hands and, all the bits and pieces around that. We wouldn't have a huge crew anyway. So it wouldn't be too affected by some of the restrictions. I think as long as you're being safe and you're being sensible and you're following the guidelines, then you will be okay.
Right.
At the moment, who knows? But
yeah. So in terms of getting the project up and running, how did you have to pivot in any way because of COVID in terms of collaboration and working towards financing and stuff like that?
not really pivot. I mean, it ended up, we didn't, obviously there were lots of in-person meetings that had to turn into video meetings, which is fine because that's the world now. I guess it was, the only thing was convincing people that it was going to be okay to film things, and that there was still going to be a film industry next year once all the cinema chains had shut down. But I mean, counter to that, one of our arguments was that, well, nothing is being made at the moment, and Netflix and Amazon and everyone are using up all their content, but there's going to be some time next year when they're going to run out of stuff.
Yeah.
And I pitched the idea to investors that actually it will be a really good time to have a film when no one else is shooting anything. You'll have lots of offers to sell your project to different online streaming companies and whoever else. So it might be the best time to have a finished film ready to sell.
I think that'll probably be the case. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we'll see.
So when you were hunting for base material to base your script off of, did you just happen upon I know you found one comic book, and then as part of the Kickstarter, Her was attached to that. So there was one layer deep that you had to dig to get to where, the project that you settled on. But how, how deep into the rabbit hole digging did you get to find this and arrive at this project? Or was it the first one that you found?
It wasn't the first one I found. That it was There was a comic maybe 12 months before that I was looking at. There's another comic that I've had long conversations with the artist, and I was still really keen on making it. When this one came up, it was a perfect blend of great story, but also self-contained story, minimal characters, location, and I think that would work. I thought that would work well with the budget that I thought we could raise for this. Yeah, I mean, through a Kickstarter comment, I was introduced to David's work, and I sort of, checked out some of his different comics and stuff. And it was while I was doing that, when I found Her. Yes, there were some other projects that I looked at as well, and I'm still kind of hoping that maybe one of those will be possibly another film in the future. But when I found Her, and I was just super keen on it, super enthusiastic, and I thought it was something special, and I really put all my energy into to making the film and convincing David that I was the right person to make the film.
Right. Well, seeing the Fox, I think that I'm not familiar with Her, but seeing your short film, The Fox, I imagine that there must be synergies. I think you have a very specific style, and maybe we could start talking about that a little bit, particularly as it pertains to transitioning the comic over into a written script. You're making a feature-length film based on how long was the comic? Just 20 or 30 pages?
Yeah, it was just a few pages, yeah.
Which is a typical length, yeah. And then, so story-wise, how do you stretch something that short into something quite a bit longer? Is there a lot added that wasn't added, and do you confer with the original creator if they're okay with any additions that you propose?
Yeah, I mean, starting off on that, I mean, I was, like I said, it's a one sort of shot comic. And I had long conversations with David to start with, and we both agreed that there was, I had to kind of slightly go my own way. I had to do something that was based on his, but wasn't necessarily word for word, frame for frame his. I had to almost tell my own story based on the essence of what was in his comic, which I think is was definitely what we're trying to do anyway. Sorry, what was your question? What was your first question? I completely forgot.
Yeah, I mean, that generally answered it. I was
Okay.
a bit long-winded, but essentially,
Yeah.
how do you transfer a shorter comic
Yeah.
into a longer narrative
Yeah.
script?
I guess the idea is not to stretch it. And just kind of like add in a whole bunch of stuff. It's to, like I said, try and find that essence. What is the story really about? What is the what is behind the story? What is the meaning of it? Why are we telling it? Why is it important? And trying to use that as a jumping point to kind of retell the sort of same thing. Start with the world that was created in the comic and make that wider, make it bigger, put more into the characters, create better and stronger backstories, and add little bits of sugar coating here and there as well.
More depth, I guess.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then as you imagine, you have the written word, you're writing your script and slowly visualizing it. Are you imagining almost using some of the images from the comic as a storyboard, like for, a couple of key shots? Or I guess the question would be, to try to boil it down a little bit for you, is does the style of the comic totally match your style as a director?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. So I feel like my style, I'm a big fan of, I guess, kind of crime thrillers that don't take themselves too seriously, a bit of black comedy and stuff like that. I think the comic has quite sort of noir thriller sensibilities. I'm within the script itself, maybe it's got a little bit more black comedy than was originally in the comic. So I'm trying to add some humor into that without making it sort of a full-on comedy or anything like this. More like sort of wry smiles. I feel like my style, I don't know if I really have a style, but if I did, I guess it's kind of like slightly removed from reality. I really appreciate I love putting a sort of visual language on films. I love stuff like movies by like the Coen brothers and Ryan Johnson, all these kind of like contemporary directors who really take time to think about the frame and the movement of the camera and really using the camera to tell the story. And yeah, that kind of style I tried out in some regards in the Fox, and I'll try and use that similar style in sort of To A Cinder, I think, as well.
Yeah, successfully. And I know that sort of directing and filming takes a lot of time, ton of planning and preparation. You had a lot of tight close-up camera movement, and things like that. So do you think that, so I would say the Fox for me was pretty dense with style in a very good way. And I wonder if it's going to be as densely stylized. I loved that about it. And I wondered if that style and the consistency of that style is going to carry through to A Cinder.
Yeah. I think, I'd like it to definitely have a style. It will be not exactly the same as the Fox. It'll be maybe a slightly toned down version of that, especially with the constraints on shooting days and this type of thing. And
Right.
with the idea that to bring just a few points more of realism into the film itself. But yeah, I think overall it'll be quite similar. I'm not trying to match it or anything. I just think that's how I naturally shoot, and that's how I like shooting things, and those are the types of shots I think of when I'm trying to tell a story. So
Yeah, I mean, it was very cohesive in the Fox, and but I imagine that it might be very difficult to maintain that pace of stylization for a feature-length film. So, yeah, I was definitely curious if you thought that would be something that you could attack, or if you would have to stretch it out a little bit. But one thing I appreciated about the Fox, and it seems like there may be some carryover to A Cinder, was the self-contained nature of the environment and the story and the characters. So, I don't want you to spoil your own upcoming movie, but if you want to introduce the synopsis a little bit and any characters and whatever you're wanting to reveal about that, to give an idea of the scope of the universe and what viewers are going to see when the project is released.
yeah. 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 So, like you mentioned, the Fox is quite self-contained. It's almost entirely within this one house. And To A Cinder, similarly, is set in a minimal number of locations. It's about a stakeout that turns into an obsession. It's about a young man, an operative, an ex-military man hired to do sort of shady jobs for a shady agency, uh, kind of reeling from a job that's supposedly gone wrong that we don't know much about. He's given something very easy, a task, like I said, a stakeout. He's just supposed to watch a woman through a window, stay in a room, and just keep himself to himself. But he slowly starts to become obsessed with the woman that he's watching. And rather than watching her, he feels he has this need to protect her. And that's kind of like the jumping off point for the story. Yeah. So it kind of starts off as almost like a rear window type setup.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of the start of it. And then it kind of diverges from there.
From the precedent set by Rear Window.
Yeah. He starts leaving the sort of bounds of the stakeout, leaving the bounds of the room he is in to follow this woman, to protect her wherever she goes, and that's when it starts turning into a sort of the mystery thriller starts coming into play.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that sounds really fun. Very cool. Yeah. So, and you mentioned that I think all of the other material, including this, that you were considering and looking at were comics. Are you a big comic reader yourself?
Yes. Recently I have been. I guess I'm quite a big comic book movie fan. And not necessarily, kind of Marvel, DC type stuff, but there's a lot of movies that I'm particularly fond of, and that later on I found are based on a comic. And yeah, I just so the last few years I've been more into comics and sort of indie comics, getting more into them and reading them and so I guess I am a comic book fan, but I'm a recent comic book fan. Yeah.
It's hard to claim fandom if you don't have a level of confidence in that in that fanatical space. So I'm kind of I'm kind of similar. There's old stories that I used to read, and I pick up a comic book here and there now. But it's hard to say you're a fan, because when you do, you might be put on the spot and not have the knowledge to participate in a conversation.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, but don't ask me any questions about anything.
Yeah, I love it, but I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Awesome. And rewinding a little bit, I'm curious to hear about when you decided to do film. You mentioned that you had studied economics and then you went back to school. Did you work in between going back to school and your first degree and your degree in film directing?
Yeah, so I got into sort of short filmmaking. I worked in TV for a bit, TV productions and stuff like this, and then in my sort of spare time, I was making short films. So I did that for 2-3 years, and then kind of went back to study film after that, because I thought I wanted to do some formal training and I wanted to do a bigger film project as well. So yeah, I worked on Big Brother. I think you probably have that over in the States. And so I was doing kind of like assistant jobs and getting people coffees and all this type of stuff, which was fun for a bit.
But when you went to school for economics, was your plan to get a job within that field, business or policy work or something like that? Or were you already kind of jonesing for a career in film and to whet your appetite in creative spaces?
I think when I started my degree, I just when I started my degree, I didn't have a plan to become a filmmaker, definitely. But I didn't really have a plan to do anything with economics either. It was more just to learn about the subject. I think at that time I was still searching for something to do. I was kind of dabbling a bit in photography and kind of music and stuff. And I think when I sort of started making films, I thought, this is great. I used to write like lots of short stories, and it was a way you could bring together storytelling, music, sound, visual arts, all combined as this one thing. So yeah, I think that's, maybe around the age of 18, 19 is where I really started getting into it.
Into film. And is that when you first actually filmed something and started piecing together projects?
Yeah, that's when I first, I started off by editing different music videos and editing them together. And then I had a real, one of those like handy cam video things that you put like the tapes into, and one of those things. And I started making films, and at first no one would be in my film. So I'd make them with like toys or like a football. I made a couple of films with my dog. Then I started roping in my sisters and eventually my friends, and then eventually actual real actors and stuff. So yeah, it's just one of those things, if just when you start off, you just try and make anything that you can with whoever you will be in it, don't you?
Yeah, ride that passion. But
Yeah.
were you discouraged at all that it was hard to find willing participants?
Not really. It was, I mean, to be honest, it was actually better, because then I thought, well, if actual people are in it, then they're going to want to see it, and I might embarrass myself. And so it was a good practice to, just practice on sort of inanimate objects and animals that don't have too much critique in them.
And then when was the first time that you filmed a subject that could criticize you? And like how what was that project, and how was it to share it for the first time?
I think I made a short film. I must have been 21, 22. I kind of, thought, okay, let's do something. So I made this short film, and it was about an estate agent showing a couple around a house. And then the kind of, it was like a sort of horror, dark comedy thing. And there was a twist that he had these two zombie parents who he was keeping in his attic, and he was actually just showing the couple around so he could feed them to his parents, so they would get something to eat. So it was a bit of a sort of weird thing, but it was fun. I put a posting out and got some real actors and cast people, and I took the film, and it played in the BFI in London, and got in a festival and all this type of stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was cool. I was hooked. And before then, I'd worked as a runner and an AD on a whole bunch of other people's short films to understand that the short filmmaking process and how to get people geared up. And I worked with a cameraman that I liked and a sound person that I liked from a different film, and talked to them and convinced them that they should come and work on my film. And so I sort of gathered a small crew of people that I liked, and yeah, that was the first thing I really sort of made and had a screening anywhere. And yeah, it was fun. There's at one point, because we were shooting in this house, and it was daytime, but we were shooting it as if it was night. So we had bin bags on all the windows to make sure the room was very dark and keep it black and stuff. And at one point, while we were shooting, we had a knock on the door. Went and answered, and the police were there. So these two policemen were outside, and they said to me, your neighbor saw that you had put bin bags on all your windows and thought you had killed someone, and that you were chopping up their body inside your flat. Which I thought was quite, it was quite, well, a great imagination, but quite a jump of a story to sort of come up with that. So we had to bring the police into the house to be like, look, we're making a film. This is why we have the bin bags here. And they said, okay, cool. It's all fine. But yeah, quite a fun experience for my first film, I guess. So it was good.
Yeah, that would have been, good B-roll for the making of.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before, and I want to go back to it, that going to school for film directing was a great opportunity to network. And if you could just elaborate on your experience, like if people out there have need recommendations for good ways to network and the ways that you have utilized your network that, can be applied to film and or um, other such endeavors.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important in any industry or anything you're working on to have a group of people who you can talk to about what you're doing, uh, friends and contemporaries who you can discuss your craft with, but also just kind of hang out and moan, you know, particularly writing and directing, which is a sort of a one man, a one woman show that, you're on your own a lot of the time. You're creating your own work. You're not always sitting with a whole bunch of people coming up with ideas. You're sort of sat at your own desk or, in a cafe, sort of doing your own thing. It's really good to have a group of people you can talk to about it. So yeah, I mean, I found that going to film school was a great way to build up that network, to meet people who were the same age as me, who had the same passion as me, who had all wanted to be directors or writers or producers or editors, but all had their own sort of unique style or part of the industry they really wanted to crack, whether, it might be films or TV or documentaries or experimental or music videos, lots of different things going on. And, a really great way to learn off each other. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and when you're working on projects and you don't have too many people willing to help you for free when you are on a budget or don't have a
Yeah,
budget at all, you could kind of all help each other out, I imagine.
exactly. Yeah. There's nothing like talking to someone about a project that you're going to do and then turning around and saying, I'll come and help you. I'll give you a few days of my time for free. That kind of enthusiasm from other people that gets you more excited about your own projects, gives you the self-belief and confidence to imagine that your project is worth people's time and effort. And then obviously, reciprocating that and getting to work on other people's stuff and seeing what they're doing is a great chance to learn and help out and, kind of develop that kind of bonding and that shared application of hard work and artistry to create great films.
Yeah. And in my own experience, I think I was a little shy to, I had no budget to reach out to people I didn't know. But at the end of the day, that reciprocity and, the even if you give your time to somebody on their project, you're benefiting from the experience and learning and being part of that community. It's not totally selfless from the person who's offering their time, and then it's not totally selfish of the person who accepts the offer. So that community aspect, I realize more and more is very important to excelling in these sorts of spaces.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, with my very first short film, I was only able to make that because I'd worked on a whole bunch of other people's, and this was before I went to film school. This was, just finding people posting online saying, I'm making a film, I don't have any money, and me just saying, yeah, I'll come and help. I'll carry some equipment for you. I'll get people coffees. I'll, hold costumes, whatever it might be. Just being on set and helping out. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun being on set. It's fun making films. That's why we kind of get into it. So why not do it as much as possible?
Yeah. What do you like best about being on set? That was kind of my next question, and you set the stage for it yourself.
I don't know. There's just like an energy. There's an energy, isn't it? It's like when the actors start saying their lines and the camera's moving and the sound guys, got his boom right there trying to get it, and people are, around the monitor, the makeup person is checking that everything's perfect and everyone's just doing their little job and all the sort of little bricks of the film, and it all kind of adds up to this one thing, this kind of shared collaborative ideal. It's exciting. There's just a buzz and energy.
Yeah, I think for me, when I did my film, it was really my first project like that. So I was kind of shocked and surprised and startled at first at this kind of resonance you get between people,
Yeah.
because I wrote the film and it existed in my head for so long before I was able to bring other people into the project. And when I did, I realized that this collaboration is a spark for building upon what's in my head, and relying on these people and having trust in them to help bring it to fruition and to make it. And on set, I felt this kind of summer camp vibe. I don't know if you guys in the UK have summer camps like we do here in the US, but yeah, just getting out and just being amongst your peers in a kind of condensed time together, where you're spending a lot of time together, very intimate in ways. And you learn a lot about yourself and the other people and the way that you interact with them. And like you face challenges together you need to overcome, very similar to like a tug of war or something at a summer camp. So I
Yeah.
really appreciated that about it.
Yeah, there is this, you're right, there's this kind of intense bonding process you go through on a film shoot. And it's weird because you get to the end of the shoot and you feel like all these people are my best friends, and we're probably going to hang out forever and ever and ever. And then a lot of them, they'll move on to the next job, and you might see them and you might not. But there's something special about it. I agree. Do you have a follow up project that you're thinking about at the moment, a sort of a
I'm
next step?
working on yeah, I have a interest in practical effects, like Godzilla type stuff.
Mm.
And I think that that is a dying art. And I'm working on some costumes and eventually would like to work on some sets to do scaled practical effects of giant creatures and robots
That's
walking
cool.
around. But my very, and this is probably why I call this podcast "What's Your Random," is because I find myself to be extremely random. Creativity, I think, is random, but I think I have a very peculiar ideas on my own. And yeah, I like to bridge kind of these campy genres with drama and kind of some sense of realism, when actually the practical effects don't really seem real at all, and there's a lot of suspense of disbelief. um, yeah, so I'm working on that now. But one of my challenges, and I'm realizing more and more that I need to collaborate and find like-minded folks myself, is that it's an ambitious project for one person, so I'm not going to be able to do it on my own, and eventually need to start bringing others into the fold.
And is there a sort of a filmmaking community where you are in North Carolina?
Yeah, there is a decent one, from what I understand. The challenge for me so far, so I just moved down here right before the new year. I was here for essentially 3 months, and then COVID hit as I was still settling in. So I haven't been able to participate very much in any community or try to connect. So I've joined a couple of groups online, and have started to interact here and there with people who seem like they might be on a similar wavelength as me. But one of my other hobbies is rock climbing, and that's where I when I was in New York and before I came down here, met a lot of most of the friends who I met as an adult, who have become lifelong friends, were people I met at the climbing gym.
Mm.
And I was anticipating that being the case down here as well, but I haven't. The climbing gym closed down, and now I'm not super comfortable going to climb at a gym, because it's just even if it is open, it's a little hard to keep it sanitized.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. In that vein of thought, do you have any uh, other interests, random or not, outside of filmmaking?
Um, yeah, I mean, I like you know, all your sort of standard things, listening to music and uh, reading, obviously, like watching movies and all this type of stuff. I play a lot of football, or soccer, snowboarding, stuff like this. Um, yeah, what
D-
else do I do? I don't know.
that's
A few things.
that's quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I run, I do rock climbing, some film, editing, some woodworking, like very simple stuff, especially in lockdown. And since we
Mm.
moved, I was like, might as well build some furniture. Yeah, I like craft. So that's another reason I started this podcast, and kind of dictates my line of questioning, is to dig into how people go about bringing what's in their head,
Yeah.
arriving at an idea, and then bringing it to fruition. I think that's always really interesting.
Yeah. I like creativity, I think. Um, you know, ways you can think around problems, ideas, and sparks and bits like that. So anything like that I can bring into, whether it's you know, making a film or playing a sport. That's what I really enjoy.
Yeah. How does in all with all of the projects that you've made in the past, and then for To A Cinder, what's the how does the idea manifest itself to the point where you're like, I need to make this? Because, in my own experience, it was like going to bed at night, every night, this idea coming into my head. And as I was going to sleep, very excitedly building upon that idea, and just very coming from my subconscious or the muse, or wherever creativity comes from on an individual basis. I was just coming up with these ideas that really fed well into the base idea, and it kind of snowballed, and then it got to a point where it was just like got too big for me to contain inside, and I was like, I need to try to make it, I need to try to do something. So what I mean, with the seed, starting with the seed of an idea, where does the seed come from, and how does it manifest, and what's the point where you say, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess the seed can come from anywhere really, and it can be, it can be a plot or a world or a main character, and a mission that they've got to go on, or some kind of journey. And very similar to you, I think you kind of you lie awake at night thinking about it. You stand in the shower thinking about it. Um, the idea just either it builds and it grows, and you add the bricks up. You're trying to build that thing up together, or it just goes away and you think, oh, well, that idea is not really worth it. And I think you get to a stage where you're thinking about it so much and you've got so much there that you just have to start writing things down. I think that's when okay, that's when you start thinking to yourself, okay, maybe there's something in this. If I'm bursting so much with the world and the story that I have to start putting it on paper somehow, then maybe there's something in there. And then you start obviously putting it on paper and writing it down, and see where that takes you. Is it interesting? Does it tell a story? Is it a story worth telling? I think that's the jumping off point.
And are you nervous at all when you decide, like, okay, this is like, for me, I think recently I've been thinking about anxiety and anxiousness from the perspective of, you could reframe that as excitement, right? And I think when I have an idea, there's this mix of anxiety and excitement, because, the idea feels bigger than me. And I know it's going to take a lot of energy and work to, you know, just start writing it, and then every step thereafter. So what are your emotions and feelings as you start writing something, and as you make the decision to pull the trigger to, I mean, a film in particular, I think it's so multifaceted, and really it's a huge undertaking. all of the pieces involved, all of those bricks that you referred to before that come together. How do you manage that, uh, the magnitude of that?
Yeah.
Is it overwhelming at all?
Um, I don't think overwhelming. I think I probably swing from two very extreme points while I'm writing and developing it. From, you know, this is the greatest film the world has ever seen, to what a pile of shit. Why am I wasting my time? I should be embarrassed. I should lock myself in a room and never be allowed out. And I don't think there's any sort of middle. I mean, obviously, it's all in the middle ground, but it doesn't really feel like there's any kind of middle ground. Either one day it feels great, and the other day it feels terrible. Um, I think it's important with films to have multiple projects going on at any one time. I think if you put all your eggs in the sort of one film basket, then you're opening up yourself to be slightly disappointed if that one doesn't catch fire straight away. So part of it, I think, is to have a number of projects going on at different stages. And when you kind of talk to people, you can pitch different things depending on who they are or what you think they might like, so that as different projects pick up the pace or slow down, it doesn't affect you too much emotionally. I think when I first started, I was very much, this is my project, I'm going to make it. And if it didn't happen, then I got very disappointed. And so I think I've learned from that over the years, and now I have a number of different things going on. I think that's quite important to spread the load around a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it sounds like, you're working in these creative spaces and you introduce yourself, and naturally people want to know, what are you working on now? And if you have only one thing that you kind of tie yourself to, and your personality and your introduction, you're not just yourself, but you're this one singular project that you're working on in the current moment. And I find that overwhelming, because I just have that one project under my belt, and I wasn't totally satisfied with all of the outcome. So it does become cumbersome if you're tying yourself to that one project. And I guess it's I think what I would take from what you said, which is a very, very good point that I experienced personally, is don't tie yourself to that one project. You're bigger than that one idea.
You are, Kevin. You're bigger than that.
Thank you. Yeah. So what was that project that, how long ago was that? And, in what way, if you don't mind sharing, in what way were you not totally satisfied with it? I don't want to be the only one put on the line here.
Yeah, no, I guess it was more things that I've written that haven't really taken off. So feature scripts that I've written that I've sort of showed some people to, and they've been like, yeah, it's okay. And then either there's not enough interest that makes me think, okay, let's spend 5 years trying to get this made. So it's either I feel maybe it's not quite good enough and I need to go back to the drawing board, or I kind of, I come up with another idea and I kind of get slightly distracted by that. It's different thing. I don't think I've gone through a whole project and made a film and been terribly disappointed in it. I've always picked apart my films and seen what I could do better, but I kind of see it more as a learning curve. But I definitely think there are scripts that I've written that just haven't been up to the standards that there are in the industry. Because I think when you put films out there, it gets compared to every film that is out there, whether it's made for £1 or £100 million. Whether it's a sort of big Transformers movie or a Scorsese movie or an indie movie on the tiny budget, they all get compared in the same space. So I think you've got to be quite critical on yourself. And at the script stage, I think that's a stage where you can write for yourself and you can say and work out whether what you're writing is up to industry standard.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So do you have a lot of stories in your personal library on the shelf that you can pick out from? And do you ever revisit things that you thought at a time were not up to a standard and try to rework them?
Yeah. I've kind of got a bunch of ideas. I've got some old scripts that I'm still pitching around, and after this film, I'll hope to sort of dust them down and maybe pitch those around along with some of the ideas as well, because an idea doesn't necessarily lose its strength over time. It can it can still be something strong depending on whether you thought of it that second or 10 years ago. Maybe it often doesn't matter too much. So yeah, definitely, those are all things I've got. I keep in mind, definitely. Yeah.
Very cool. And what do you think in terms of distributing your film? Do you think that far ahead at this stage, or do you just focus on the task at hand?
Well, I'm trying to focus on the task at hand. I have a producer, Paula, who is more engaged with distributors and sales agents and thinking about that long-term goal and how we're going to achieve that. So I've handed most of that over to her in that sense at the moment. But yeah, we're hoping to talk to some people, get some early interest, and see where that takes us. I haven't done too much down this journey before in that sense, trying to sell a feature film in that way. So it's quite new for me. So I guess I'll just wait and see, and hopefully make a film good enough that people are going to want to see it.
Yeah, well, if it's anything like The Fox, I think you will attract a good audience. I mean, yeah, just a lot of reference points, but also very unique to, I think, you and your vision. I really enjoyed it. Is there a specific way that you would talk about the way that you shoot film, a style that's particular to you? Get it, maybe instead of referencing other materials, talking about specific shots or sequences that you like to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's slightly hyperrealism. I guess it's it's that kind of idea of a slightly parallel universe. It's sort of like exaggerating certain moments to make them more interesting, to heighten the entertainment. I used to love going to the cinema and being entertained, seeing cool, interesting, like original shots, and that blended within a great story, and laughing and being amazed and getting emotional, going through a whole range of different emotions, and I think a visual style is very much part of that template. So I guess it's just trying to make the types of films that I love going to watch, and or the type of those visions of the things that I want to see up on screen, things that would entertain me.
Yeah, I think that the hyperrealism, when I was watching The Fox, I felt very present. There's an attention to detail, and the environment around you that was conveyed in a very eloquent way, along with the action and dialogue. Like, I picked up some Tarantino vibes on some of the dialogue that was happening, and it was really enjoyable.
Cool, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I don't know if you have any other questions or comments or anything else you want to shoot the shit about.
I don't know. No, I mean, again, just thank you so much for inviting me on this. This has been really fun. What are your future plans? Have you got people lined up? Is it filmmakers? Is it comic book people? Is it other, people in other industries? Where are you taking this?
So yeah, I mean, my concept is to talk to fine arts people if they're willing to talk to me. I don't have a lot of experience in that area, but hopefully they can enlighten me a little bit and teach me a little bit more about appreciating their art and film. I have a little bit more technical perspective from which I could ask my questions. So I think this is, for me, a more comfortable space to be interviewing from with a fellow filmmaker. Tomorrow I have an interview with a documentary filmmaker, which is going to be fun, who also has a Kickstarter project going on. I think I'll probably interview a good amount of comic book folks because there's so much activity in the indie space there, as well as film. I mean, I'd like to interview board game creators, business people with, kind of interesting business ideas, and inventors, and whoever has a creative idea and is willing to talk about their inspiration, their process, and all of that fun stuff. I'd love to speak to. So if you have any friends in any, within filmmaking, outside of filmmaking, audio people, visual people, editing people, I'd love to, you could send them my way. I'd love to speak with them.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely put you in touch with a few people. The one that springs to mind is David, who made the comic that
would be cool. Yeah.
He's done a whole series of really cool comics. I think he's got a Kickstarter going at the moment. All the more reason. And I realized that the podcast itself could become more of an asset to guests if they have a project that's upcoming, or on Kickstarter or Patreon, or if they're fundraising now, essentially. So I definitely want it to be collaborative in that way, kind of like we were talking about when you help out on other people's film projects. Yeah. So I mean, if it could benefit my guests in any way, I would love to time it with that kind of strategy. Excellent. Well, I'll put you in touch with David then. He'd love that.
Yeah. Please do. Cool. And I guess we'll call it quits here today, but I hope to have you back on in the future after the campaign, after once you're promoting the film and when you're on to your next project. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. No, I'll be up for that. I'll let's keep in touch, and I'll listen to all the new episodes, and let's do this again sometime in the future.
Thank you very much, Henry.
Cool.
Have a great evening. You stayed up pretty late for us. I appreciate it. And good luck, best of luck, and have a great night.
Nice one. Cool. Thanks a lot, Kevin. Take care, mate.
So one thing I want to do at the end of shows, once my guest signs off and I have a couple of days to process and I'm in editing, is to revisit my own creative process and how I go about making this podcast. It's new, and there's a steep learning curve for me in production and also as an interviewer. We can all talk, I find. We all know how to talk and communicate with one another, but there are definitely skills that I'm picking up to better engage my guests and to be a more effective and efficient host. And I hope that you've seen some improvement since my first 2 or 3 podcasts to today, and I hope to continue improving, and I'm open to suggestions. Leave comments if you have any feedback. In terms of the process, I started to streamline a little bit now that I have some of my podcast assets, my intro particularly on YouTube. I created the animation, and I have a general flow for how each episode is going to lead in and then finally wind down towards the end with our logo and some music. In terms of questions and things I asked during the podcast, so far I've been brainstorming, and I usually know about a guest coming onto the podcast 1 or 2 days before I interact with them. So I try to learn about their project and about them. I draw a line. I don't want to know too much about them because I don't want the questions to be asking about things I already know. I want there to be genuine discovery for me as a host. I want that to be a real genuine experience learning about somebody and not going in with too many preconceived notions about their bibliography or filmography or their past experiences and their resume. So I want to learn things as I interview them, but at the same time, I want to have some idea about the angle I could take on questions and really have some understanding of what's important to them so that I could arrange my questions in such a way. I don't have a hard list of questions, just some talking points and maybe 2 or 3 questions that I will visit if it seems appropriate. But for the most part, I try to flow a little bit, and as I'm listening, think of follow-up questions that either dig deeper or steer in a new and interesting direction as a kind of segue. One thing that was really important for me was I was using Google Docs and notes on my computer to write questions, and that really threw me off. It was hard to click around on the computer while being conscious that somebody was looking at my face and listening to me, and I wanted them to know that I was fully engaged. But when my eyes were darting around the screen, I felt a little self-conscious that maybe I was signaling to them that I wasn't interested in the conversation when I actually was really interested, just trying to, make the best follow-up questions I could. So instead of doing that, I've moved to writing notes before. I might type them up on the computer leading into the interview, but right before the interview, I write my notes down in a notepad that I could refer to and look down, the side corner of my eye to remember those talking points. And then over the course of the conversation, I started taking notes too. And I think that's a more seamless way to participate in the discussion while simultaneously taking notes and making sure that I don't forget anything because I got a lot going on. I'm trying to catch a lot of what they're saying and think of many potential avenues I could take from each of their answers, and I don't want any of those avenues to disappear. So it has been important for me to take notes. So anyway, I hope that this was helpful. It's something that I plan to do at the end of every podcast if I learn something new. And if not, just to give you guys a sign off, thank you again for listening. And until next time, enjoy your random.